Now, some of my students probably won't know you now. So you write fiction and you write nonfiction. And for those of you who don't know Steve yet, I'm going to read so I don't forget anything here. He's the author of Breaking into the Backcountry, a memoir of his time caretaking 95 acres on a river in Southwest Oregon, which I cannot wait to talk to you about. And his fiction and his nonfiction can be found on The Rumpus, The Fiddleback, Orion Magazine, which is one of my favorites, and a bunch of other places. So as I said, everybody, I'll give you a list of links to his work, and he also sent along some links to some of his favorite writers, so that's awesome too. But what you write about, I can say fiction, nonfiction, and you're published in all these places, and you wrote a memoir. That doesn't say what you write about and why. And you and I, over the years that we've known each other, we've talked about your writing about your family. Look at me, I get choked up at everything. Okay. You know what I did just before I talked to you? I read your essay, Milk.
Oh, God.
And I lost it. Now,
that one's brutal.
Yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal and it's awesome. And it's actually one of the pieces that I want to talk about, your why. I'm so accustomed to crying in front of people, so I do it all the time. I used to apologize for being moved by people's writing and being unable to be professionally contained when I talk about people's writing, but I think that this is a really good, it's a really beautiful and brutal piece to talk about, and also to enter into that conversation about why do we write what we write? What are we hoping for in our reader? To me, what we're hoping for in some pieces, and at least at some level, what we're hoping for is my reaction. That piece wrecked me for a good 10 minutes. And it was awesome. So can we talk about either about Milk itself or, and writers, I'll have a link to that so that you can read it and know what we're talking about here. So either that piece or sort of in general about who you are and why you write. And there doesn't have to be one specific reason.
Sure.
You want to jump off on that and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I remember with that piece in particular, we were just having a really hard time with a lot of different things, money, our child's health, our relationship, such as it was going through a crisis, and just the stories about giving him these drops in his milk, this medicine. I have to count 56 drops every time for this gastro problem. And I was just thinking with that piece, it didn't even start out as something I wanted to publish. I just was making a list of all the shit I had to do because I wanted to remind myself, this is why, you feel depressed. This is why you feel rage. Because I was just trying to contextualize my own life because I'm sure you understand, when things explode, there's chaos and some semblance of order, something to hold on to. And so I just started making a list of all the different things that were going on. My wife had fallen and hurt her knee. And we were wondering about it. Would she have to do a surgery or, and so that story really just was me trying to do an accounting. But I think the second thing I would add to that is that it became more than that. When I started to polish it into a piece, into a brief essay. I think my work is about trying to find connection, and these hardships can be so alienating and so isolating, that polishing it into a formal piece that will resonate with someone like it did with you, makes me feel less alone. And so time and again, that tends to be my theme. And that's what I feel when I read, my students ask me sometimes, why are all these stories we read so depressing? And I'm like, so you don't feel alone.
Yeah.
Right?
Because they're true.
Because they're true.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
It's-
we spend
so
some time talking about, I mean, you know how much I can go on rants about these things like that pervasive happy ending story and how much it just does not match the reality that we live. And if we insist that the Hollywood happy ending is how things are supposed to go, then it leaves people thinking there's something wrong with them, right? And I love what you said there. Like, you write to find your own connection, to make you feel less alone. I think sometimes we talk about, oh, I write my personal stuff so that people reading it don't feel alone, which is a beautiful and valid and powerful reason. And kind of linking back to what we were talking about with how we find each other on Twitter, and pieces that we find, and we love them, and we write back to the author to tell them what their work meant to them. It does come back to us and tell us, okay, you're alone in this, but you're not alone. And it doesn't
right.
cancel out how difficult that is. And I love the way that you end that essay, right? Talking about the beauty that you find is a medicine inside the greater suckage of all of it. And they don't cancel each other out, but they're both there and they're both valid. And like, those are the stories that we need. And I mean, maybe I'm just odd like that, but I don't find those stories depressing. I find them true.
Me too.
Yeah.
I find them affirming.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just think, right, I'm not alone. We're not alone in this.
Mm-hmm.
And more often than not, what comforts me, even from the hard stories, are that someone recognized this dimension of life and was able to so thoroughly render it, to show me that that they understood this dynamic, not the whole thing, but at least enough to share it in a piece that I feel like, oh, it's possible, to change, or not to change, but to sort of embrace the way things are. Yeah. Like, somebody else recognized this dimension of life.
Yeah, and that recognition is so powerful, right? Like,
yeah.
This is what I say all the time. Like, we need these stories. We need people to be able to tell the truth with craft and with skill, which is what we're going to get into next. But we need these stories, right? Because if you've got those two extremes, you've got, puppy dogs and rainbows and all the animated birds singing and everything works out great and you feel better for it, or you are like this depressed person rocking in the basement forever and ever, like, that is not where most people live. And so the more stories that we can tell, well-told stories, powerful, beautiful stories in whatever genre, in whatever form, the more we sort of populate that middle ground and other people can find themselves there. And I love that. Like, that's what we do as writers. That's what we do as teachers, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we start populating that middle ground with the stories we actually need to live here?
I know. I think about Cheryl Strayed's Dear Sugar column.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I think that spoke to so many writers.
Yep.
About, not just I had a student who just, wanted to do a creative thesis, do an essay or something. And so we just did some very tentative exercises. She made a map of this place she wanted to write about and pick some stories. Yeah. But she started getting stuck. And it turned out, she was having a relationship with the guy who was a sociopath. And she was just discovering it.
Oh, and I didn't realize that was the timing of that piece of your work with her, that she was just figuring it out. Oh,
yes.
Writers, we'll have a link to the essay Steve's talking about in the show notes. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so I had her read those Dear Sugar columns and see the way that Cheryl Strayed just brings that intensity of telling the truth. Yeah. Without, having to dress it up or justify it, but just to sort of straight to the bone. Mm-hmm. And I really think it was reading Cheryl Strayed that gave her sort of permission / inspiration to just tell what happened, and to, like, I had another student a long time ago who said it better. She said, I had to learn how to write my story in order to better understand it myself. Yeah. And that, like, learning how to write a story gave her ownership over her experience in a way that nothing else had.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's magic. It's
It
amazing.
is
But
magic, and
like
it
like
really
those
is.
truth tellers, like Cheryl Strayed, like
Yeah.
it's contagious.
It is contagious, right? Like, so I was talking to somebody about our I haven't even found words to talk about this yet, but the current escalation of crazy shit happening in our country right now. But I was talking about the idea of hope and how fucked we are and how not fucked we are and all of these things. And I was like, well, we're talking about a lot of stuff that has always been happening, but has been under the radar. And as ugly as all of this is, and in no way do I want to minimize the real danger and the real pain and suffering that's happening, the fact that we're entering into conversations about this and arguments and that people are writing about it, it has always been here. It's just gotten to a point where it's loud enough that more of us are listening. And that makes me feel actually very hopeful. If we look at, and I'm going to link this back into our roles as writers and how we take the personal story and bring that out into the world. I always loop back. But I was referencing when I was talking to this colleague of mine about an essay that I read way before the internet, so I don't remember where it is. I have a physical printout of it somewhere in this house. But the article's title, as best as I can remember, was Reason to Hope or something. I remember the first line, right? Because I'm a writer. I remember an opening line. And the opening line was, I'm a recent convert to hope. And what that writer was talking about was, at that time, the sort of new personal thing on the culture's screen was child abuse. And she was discussing a conversation she had with somebody about how horrible the epidemic of child abuse is in this culture. And her response was, yes, and we're talking about it. So let's take the long look here.
Right.
It used to be true that they used to take newborn infants and dunk them in ice water because infant mortality rates were so high that if your baby didn't survive being dunked in ice water, it probably wouldn't have lived anyway. Right? There's historical data that backs this up. I'm not making shit up this time. No fiction right now. But that when we take that long view, the way that we get to places that, like, writing about child abuse in some ways is no longer the taboo that it used to be. We have more of a cultural conversation. We have more cultural outrage. There are more interventions in place now. There is still a gigantic problem, don't get me wrong. And the reason that we've made the progress that we have in protecting children, if we're going to stick with this example, is because of the writers. Right? Yeah. It's because it's because people took their stories to the page, and literally back then it was the page, right? We didn't have blogs, we didn't have HuffPo, we didn't have Cup of Joe, we didn't have these places, but people started writing. They started telling what was true for them, and it made things different.
Yep.
So all we have to do when we're looking at, like, do our personal stories matter out in the world? All we have to do is look at the progress we've made. If we turn around and look back, like, the beautiful things that we have inside the horrendous things we have, the understanding, the support, no matter how small, we have those things because of people's stories, because they took the narrative of what was true for them and put it out into the world in some crafted or sculpted way.
Right. Well, I mean, I hear stories about transgender kids and which bathroom they'll use at school. Mm-hmm. In my childhood, there was no discussion of that.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, it is amazing. A friend of mine used to say, she used to hike the Grand Canyon. She said you can never gauge your progress by looking at those mountains in the distance. Right. It's only by turning around and seeing where you came from.
Yeah, that's right. And how important personal story is in there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's just,
Well,
it's, yeah.
just was thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking, you get down on yourself sometimes. As writing is hard, and you wonder, oh, does it make a difference?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I started thinking about was how grateful I was for all the people who stuck it out
Yeah.
and whose essays revealed something about life to me that I couldn't have gotten without their sort of engagement with that pain.
Yeah.
And I just thought, what a gift, to be able to make something, that recognizes somebody else,
Yeah.
And what we sort of share. And I think, I haven't thought that much as you have about the wider cultural implications, but I mean, yeah, people telling their stories changes the world.
It does.
It just does.
It just does. Yeah. and especially like my focus, as we know, is on grief, and it intersects with everything, right? Like how we come to pain in this culture is not only about the kind of tight lens grief that I often talk about, but all the pain in this life, all the suffering that we experience and all the suffering that we see, we're really shit at hearing that and responding to it. And suffering doesn't get the support and the care that it needs, and this is why this particular course, right? Because we need this to get better, right? We need this on an individual basis because of everything you and I just talked about needing to feel supported and companioned and heard inside our stories. And we need it to get better. We need to start talking about this because we need all of us to learn these skills about what it's really like to be here and how hard it is to be human here, and what it takes to really listen to each other and care for each other better. We need those skills. It's about grief. It's about your own personal experience, beautiful and brutal all at the same time. It's about that, and it's also about something much larger, and being able to take your place in that, with the power of your words and with some craft and some skill, and then also with those really like sort of tangible hard earth skills of like, where do I find a place to pitch, and what do I do when the editor says no, and like all of those things, like they all dovetail together into this. I don't know, I don't want to make it sound really overwhelming, but like there is a big thing going on here, and I want people to be able to take their beautiful, brutal, powerful words and shape them in such a way that they can take their place in what's happening, and that they can be part of the change that's already started. I mean, I've been at this particular iteration of this work for 4 or 5 years now in this, and at the time that you and I are talking, I'm coming up on 8 years since Matt died. And so 8 years ago in 2009, nobody was talking about grief. Nobody was talking about perfectly healthy, strong, capable people who walk into a river and never come back out. Nobody was talking about dead babies. Like this stuff was not getting talked about. That was only 8 years ago. There were no blogs. There were the only resources that I could find were either heavily religious, or they were talking about grief as a clinical pathology, all of those things that just infuriate me. But even on the blogs, like, because blogs, hard to believe, but 8 years ago, blogs were still pretty new. Isn't that crazy? Like how much has exploded since
I know.
But the ability to find people who sounded like me, being able to find people that sounded like me was nearly impossible. I mean, I spent hours and hours and hours for months following just the tiniest little breadcrumb. And it's not like that now, right? I sometimes get tricked into believing that, oh, everything's good now. Like, we're all talking about this now. And then I talk to somebody who's their life has newly exploded, and they're like, what the fuck is wrong with people? I'm like, oh, right. No, it hasn't changed yet. I have a little bubble of awesome. But it is happening and it is changing, and it's because people are telling their stories. It's because the word is getting out there, and there is some gorgeous fucking writing out there. And there's gorgeous fucking writing out there that has not yet seen the wider audience that it deserves, and that it needs, and it hasn't met the people who need it most, right? Which is why we're doing what we're doing here together. Is how do we do that? How do we take the stories of what's true and take them apart, shape them in a way that the why for that piece, or our hopes for that piece, can be delivered in a way that really reaches somebody in the way that we want to reach them. So if you're ready, we can kind of switch into how the hell we do that. So this, I know, right? Like, how the hell do we do that?